A man comes home at the end of the day of work. He notices on the lawn there's toys strewn all over, garbage all over the place. His wife's car door is open, and he gets a little alarmed. He goes inside, and he sees the cereal boxes all over the place, food scattered all over the floor, more toys and clothes strewn all over. He rushes up the steps to see where's his wife? How's she doing? What happened here? He opens up his bedroom door, and he sees his wife lounging in the bed, reading a novel. He's like, what went on today? And she says, oh, hi, how was your day? And he's like, what went on? What's going on here? And she says, you know how every day you come home at the end of the day and you say, what in the world did you do today, a whole day? Well, today, I decided not to do it. You know, I speak in many places, and I see all over, it seems like women are looking for that elusive balance. I'm trying to have balance in my life. I'm trying to balance the many roles that we play, the many hats that we wear, my parents, my children, work, home, inside, outside, so many areas that women are constantly juggling. And it's funny, I speak for men and women. I never hear the men looking for balance. Ever hear men looking for balance? I know kids very often talk about how mommy has eyes in the back of their head. Any of your children ever said that? Now my grandchildren say that to me. I never hear kids saying that father or daddy or Saba has eyes in the back of his head, right? And actually, scientifically, a woman's eyes can go almost 180 degrees peripheral, whereas a man's vision is more tunnel. Did you know that? Yes. So it's interesting. When I go to sleep at night, when my head hits the pillow, I'm thinking, my mind is stewing what I could do yesterday, what I should do today, all the responsibilities, what I could have done, what I should have done, what this one's need is and that one's need. When my husband's head hits the pillow, he's out cold, right? And scientifically as well, they've looked at the brains of men and women, and they saw something very interesting. In a resting state, the brain activity should usually be resting. And yet in a resting state, the brain activity of a man was 70% inactive, which made sense. However, in a resting state, the brain activity of a woman was, anyone want to guess? 90% active. Now, why this is not surprising is because in Judaism and in spirituality, when we look at spirituality, the woman is really the balance of the world. Now, we look at a world and we have 6 different directions. We have north, south, west, east, up, down, right? But we're forgetting one thing, and that is the dot in the center. If you don't have the dot in the center, you can't have north, south, west, east, up, down. Compared to what? The dot in the center is the woman. Kabbalistically, when we talk about the 6 days of the week, from Sunday to Friday, these represent the 6 directions. When we're going in an outward mode to conquer the world, to do different things in the world, to take care of issues, we're in a masculine mode. When we enter Shabbat, the 7th day, we become the dot, the center that's able to absorb all the activities. And that's why it says a woman is compared to Shabbat. Just like Shabbat HaMalkah, just like Shabbat is the source of blessing for the entire week, because you can do and do and do, and you can have so much blessing in your life. But if you don't take the time to actually absorb that blessing, to actually feel that blessing, there's no blessing. Similarly, the woman is considered that dot in the middle, that center dot, that Shabbat, that brings blessing to her entire family. And that's why the Talmud says that a man without a woman lacks happiness, blessing, joy, and all kinds of different blessings. Because if you are that dot in the middle, without that dot in the middle, you can't have the balance of the world. So as women, we are that dot in the center. No wonder that we feel so out of balance sometimes, because so much is resting on our heads. So much is resting on who we are. Our families, our world is resting. We are the balance of the world. Our sages tell us, Eshes Chayil Ataras Bala, the woman of valor is the crowning glory of her husband. The woman's light comes from a place that is beyond the brain, that is beyond the intellect. It comes from a place that's even beyond where intellect alone cannot touch. And the woman is the center, that dot that holds her entire world, the entire world. So there's like a sign that I had on my office door. It says, do you want to talk to the man in charge or the woman who really knows what's going on? Right? As that dot, as that balance, as that center, as the one that is holding so much together, we need to safeguard our boundaries. Because it's only when we can safeguard the boundaries of who we are and what we are that we can actually hold the world together. My mother, who I was, thanks to Rifki, able to visit today, thank you so much, Rifki. My parents both turned 90 this year, Baruch Hashem. And my mother grew up in Russia, in communist Russia, where keeping Yiddishkeit was something that required so much mesiras nefesh, so much self-sacrifice. She tells me stories of how when she was a little girl, the age of some of my little grandchildren, she had to go to school on Shabbat, but she would go with a bandage on her hand so she wouldn't have to write. Or she would go with a cast or with a note from the doctor to excuse her from doing any kind of activities. How when it was time for Pesach, she as a little girl rode for miles on end to go to the mill in order to get the flour that would be used for Pesach, that would be kosher LePesach. Because as a child, she was not so suspect as others were. And yet, growing up in this kind of atmosphere, this kind of environment, where Yiddishkeit was a constant struggle, she recently told me that my grandfather, Zadie Pinchas, and I bet you don't even know this, he made a campaign to try to get Jewish women in Russia to cover their hair. I know. He made a campaign because he realized this is the dot, this is the center, this is the balance of the world. And when you're talking about the balance of the world, you need to safeguard your boundaries, safeguard who you are, remember who you are. Interestingly, just about 100 years before that, in 1854, there was a terrible decree in Russia that no woman could cover her hair. 20 years later, there was a draft, and all males were called to this draft. The Rebbe Maharash, who was the Rebbe at the time, recalls this draft, and he says the women who were so careful to cover their hair, even during the decree that you could not cover your hair, their sons evaded the draft 20 years later. That's the power that we have as women. That's the power of this mitzvah. Now you might say, okay, this sounds like a little bit of a coincidence, but my sister-in-law actually showed me something that I found similar, that just happened here 2 weeks ago, where you see the power of wearing a hair covering. And this is from New York, for New York News, where two Shabbats ago, it says, and I'm going to read it from you because it's not only my words saying it, it's actually the newspaper. A Brooklyn woman is lucky to be alive after being shot in the head, thanks to a wig that seems to have absorbed the blow of the projectiles. At 7:20 p.m. on Saturday, this was on Shabbat, a woman was standing at the corner of Ross Street and Bedford Avenue when a dark-colored car approached. A backseat passenger lowered their window and opened fire. The beads struck the Orthodox Jewish woman in her wig, which was worn for religious reasons. The wig absorbed the blow, and she was not hurt. When my mother married my father, over 65 years ago, they wanted the Lubavitcher Rebbe to officiate at the wedding, and they merited. This was one of the last ones that the Rebbe actually officiated. And one of the conditions that the Rebbe had for officiating at a wedding was that the bride agrees and takes it upon herself to cover her hair. And the Rebbe made a huge campaign for women covering their hair. And I want to read to you some of the things that the Rebbe says, some of the blessings that the Rebbe spoke about. This is in the 1950s when it wasn't common to cover your hair. The Rebbe says that wearing a wig has a beneficial impact on children, grandchildren, livelihood, and health. Now the Rebbe knows what you're thinking. You're thinking probably, he says, one should not ask, I know of a woman who does not wear a wig and still things are going well for her, right? Regarding children, health, livelihood, as well as life in general. And the Rebbe answers, first of all, we don't know what transpires in the life of another person. We never know what's really going on. No one talks about things in their life. And second of all, he says, we're not to look at what is transpiring in others. We do what we are commanded for us to do. To another person, the Rebbe writes a letter, again, this is in the late 1950s. Because your wife has resolved to wear a wig and to do so gladly and will not be bothered by those who may scoff at her observance, her merit will be great. Specifically, as she is doing this the first in her neighborhood, and is well known that our sages explain the value and praise the ability of an individual to teach many through example. And one other example that the Rebbe talks about, he says, I know that at this point in time, it might be a huge expense for you, it might be very difficult to wear a wig, to buy a wig. He said, we've established a specific free loan fund administered through the Lubavitch office specifically for this purpose. That was how important it was for the Rebbe, for women to cover their hair, to wear a sheitel, to have a covering over their hair. Why? Because blessing comes through the woman to her home. Because blessing comes through that dot. Because we are that balance of it all, of our families and of our world in general. So, I know some of you might be thinking now, this is nice, but why the detail? Why the detail of having to cover your hair? Why specifically this? Isn't it enough just to be connected to God in a general way? So I recently heard about this convert who converted to Judaism. And he was somebody who actually was an expert in many different religions, and he explored all different kinds of religions. Until finally he said, Judaism is the one for me. And I wondered, what made him make that decision? What pushed him to choose Judaism over anything else? Maybe it was the kindness that we have in our communities, because there's an abundance of kindness. No, it wasn't the kindness. Maybe it was the feeling of community, feeling the close bond. No, it wasn't that. The convert explains, what was it that pushed me towards Judaism? When I saw the laws of tying your shoes. Tying your shoes? There's a custom in Judaism that when we tie our shoes, we put on our right foot first, then our left foot, tie the left foot, then tie the right foot. Does this sound very inspiring to you? He says, when I heard that God is even with me when I'm tying my shoes, that's the God that I want to join. That's the God that I want to be a part of. When God is with me in every aspect of my life, when God cares about every detail of my life, when God is concerned with everything that I do, when everything I do has that impact, that is the God that I want to be a part of. That is the religion that I want to choose. So God had this desire. He had a desire to have a relationship with each and every one of us. And he had a desire to tell us how to have this relationship. There's a beautiful pasuk in the Torah, in Parshas Kedoshim, which says, Kedoshim tihiyu, you should be holy, ki kadosh ani, because I am holy. And Rashi on this pasuk explains, Kedoshim tihiyu, you should be holy. Yachal kamoni, you might think that you could be holy like me. Talmud Lomar, that's why the pasuk tells us, ki kadosh ani, that I am holy. Only God is holy. The Rizhiner Rebbe takes this pasuk, takes this passage, and turns it on its head in the most beautiful, exquisite way. What does he say? He says, Kedoshim tihiyu, you should be holy. You can be holy. Yachal kamoni, you should think, kamoni, that you can be like me, God. You should think you can be holy like me. How should you do this? Talmud Lomar, train yourself to say, Ki kadosh ani, I am holy. Train yourself to say, I am holy because I have a piece of God in me. Just imagine for a minute, if we would train ourselves to think, I am a holy being. What would our life look like? What would our day-to-day activity look like? What would our thoughts about ourselves look like just by saying these words? I am holy because I have a piece of God in me. I am holy. When I was teaching in New City, I teach a Parsha class there, and I taught this on Parshas Kedoshim. And a week later, a woman comes over to me. She was not religious. And she says, a whole week, the entire week, I was thinking, I am holy. I'm a holy person. I thought of myself as I'm not religious, I'm not this, I don't do that. And suddenly you change that around. An entire week I thought, I am holy. And do you know what a difference it made in my week? Imagine the difference it makes in all of our week, in all of our lives. If we could say, I am holy, ki kadosh ani, I am holy. But what does it mean to be holy? What does it mean to be kadosh? The word kadosh actually means separate, detached. How are we meant to be separate and detached? God obviously is separate and detached from all this world. God is above this world. God is beyond this world. But how are we supposed to be separate and detached from this world? In fact, Judaism doesn't believe we should be separate and detached. We're supposed to work in this world. We're not supposed to just climb some mountain and sit there all day long and meditate on spiritual things. We're supposed to be living in this world. But Kadosh Ani means be in this world, be involved in this world, but don't be immersed in it. Don't be defined by it. Don't be limited by it. Involve yourself, take over this world, do things in this world, but don't define or limit yourself by this world. How do we do this? We do this by setting boundaries. We do this by creating boundaries, by being that dot inside that creates the boundaries around us. So mitzvah means connection. We connect to God. We have a relationship with God. God wants a relationship with us, and we say we're ready for that relationship. And how do we have that relationship? By creating boundaries around all physical reality. One of these relationships, one of these boundaries is through our hair covering. When we cover our hair, this is not something that we do because of beauty, because we don't want to be beautiful or we don't want to be attractive. In fact, the Talmud talks so much about a woman and refers to beauty in the most positive terms. It talks about woman as being the personification of beauty. It talks about a beautiful woman, Isha Yafa Ashrei Ba'ala, Mispar Yamav, Kiflayim. Lucky is the man who has a wife who is beautiful. The number of his days are doubled. Doubled. So the objective of covering our hair is not to limit beauty, but it's to create boundaries, to create privacy, to create a certain definition of what's inner and what's outer. And in fact, the word for hair in Hebrew is sa'ar. The word sa'ar is also related to the word sha'ar, which means gate. What is a gate? A gate is something that protects what's outer from what's inner. It creates boundaries from what's outside and what's inside. It creates domains, the inner domain and the outer domain. When a woman covers her hair, she's creating that boundary, that privacy, that inner dimension. Kvuda bas melech penima, the daughter of the king, is inwardness. She's creating that inward sanctum for herself, because she's self-aware of this boundary, as well as for others. She's creating and defining what that dot is. So it's interesting, at Matan Torah, when the Jewish people got the Torah, we see it says, Kol Somar lebeis Yaakov v'sagid l'bnei Yisrael. God says, first speak to the woman. This was in the 2400th century, 24 centuries after the creation of the world. And suddenly, the women are taking central stage. The women are first. Now we see, before that, we have Adam is created, and then Eve after, Chava after. When Noah and his sons enter the ark, they go first, the women come after. When Yaakov and his family travel, the men, the Shvatim, go first, and the women come after. All of a sudden, at Matan Torah, at the giving of the Torah, we see it's reversed. Speak to the woman first. What's causing this reversal? Why all of a sudden speak to the woman first? So the commentaries say something interesting. They say, get the woman on board, and then it'll be okay. Something that hasn't changed in all these years. Get the woman on board, everything else will follow. But the inner dimension of Torah teaches us something deeper. Man is the conqueror. He's going in those 6 different directions. He's conquering. He's conquering the darkness. He's fighting the darkness. He's importing godliness into the world. Woman is that dot. She's creating a home. She's creating an environment. For the first 24 centuries of life in this world, humanity was busy with fighting, vanquishing the darkness. But then God says, now is the time to create that home for me. I'm going to teach you how to create that home. I'm going to give you the blueprints of making a home for me. And in making the home for me, now is when the women have to take central role. Now is when to speak to the woman first, because it's the woman who creates that home. And when we create a home, we do so, the first thing that you do in building a home is the framing, the foundation. You create a boundary. What's on the outside, what's on the inside. And the final touch, the last touch that you're going to do in creating a home is that lock on the door, turning that lock. So now we're at the time when our world needs to be focused on creating that home for God, and all the more so, making it a special home, making it an inviting home where we can actually bring God into our home. The word for hair, Sa'ar, also is the same root as shi'or, which means limitations. When we talk about limitations, we talk about concealments. And here I want you to really fasten your belts, because I want to give you a little taste of what Kabbalah talks about in terms of our covering of our hair and what it means. We're told that a person is created, B'Tselem Elokim Nivra Ha'adam. A person is created in the image of God. What this means on a basic level is that we have freedom of choice. We can choose our actions. We have freedom to choose what we want to do and what we don't want to do. On a deeper level, a person's body and soul is actually a reflection of the divine construct. So our emotions and our intellect is actually a reflection of God and God's energy in this world. And I want to take this a step further. Not only are we a reflection of God, but we are actually a conduit, a funnel of divine energy into this world. Meaning that our actions magnify and increase, or God forbid the opposite, God's presence in this world. Through what we do, through our actions, through our body and soul, we diminish or enlarge God's presence here in this world. It's a fascinating thought. Think about that for a second. Think about that power that you have. Now, on a deeper level, when we look at the body, the physical body, the human body, we actually mirror the divine energy that is being brought down into this world. So when we look at a person's face, the face of a person, face is panim in Hebrew. Face, panim, is also inwardness. The divine energy that's revealed in our face is God's complete, greatest revelation. Just like when you look at a person's face, I'm looking at so many beautiful faces here. They're reflecting what's going on inside. So as a teacher, I could see who's like really listening, okay? Who's like yawning a little bit. It reflects what's going on inside. You look at someone's face and you kind of really understand the eyes, the nose, the mouth. You look at the hand and not really. You look at the leg, not really. It's the face. That's the panim, the inwardness. What's going on inside of you is reflected in your face. And the face, therefore, is a reflection of God's inward divine revelation. The strong inward part of God, the strongest part of God that's revealed in this world. And that is why you might say, Judaism has a very, there's so many different aspects of hair, how we regard hair. On the one hand, the woman's hair is covered. On the other hand, the beard of a man is considered holy, and we don't touch it. It's left out. But the beard is on the face, the facial hairs. And that's why Kabbalah explains that the beard actually is a reflection of Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim, 13 attributes of God's mercy, highest revelation of God's open revelation to us. What about the hair on the head? So the head is actually the skull, right? The skull is concealing what's underneath it, which is the brain. And therefore the head, the skull, reflects divine concealment. You see, when God created our world, imagine looking at the light of a sun. It blinds you. You can't. You just have to look away. You can't. Your eyes burn from it. God's presence is so much infinitely greater than that, obviously. So in order for God to reveal himself in this world, and for each of us to be able to sit here as individual beings with our own thoughts and our own ideas and our own freedom to choose our own ideas, God had to conceal himself. So the greatest revelation of God really is through that concealment. But the skull represents that concealment. And therefore, this hair of the head, and specifically the hair of the woman, who represents Malchus, royalty, God's kingship in this world, because in order for God to reveal himself in this world, he needed to conceal himself, but this reveals the greatest self in the lowest level, represents the woman's hair, which has this infinite potential, but needs to be covered, because something that is concealed is hiding something that's infinitely great, but also is able to be corrupted, and therefore needs to be represented only in the most protective environment. And so when a woman covers her hair, what she is saying is, I, even more than a man, I am a physical manifestation of God's energy here in this world. Every single part of my body is holy, is kadosh. Every aspect of me is holy. Even the smallest strands are holy and need to be used, therefore, in a protective environment. When a woman covers her hair, she is saying, I am that dot. I am that center. I am the balance of my family. I am the balance of the world. The world rests on my shoulders. The magnification of God's presence is up to me as that balance of the world. And when a woman covers her hair, she is saying, I am connecting to centuries of Jewish women before me, whether it's in communist Russia, whether it's in Egypt, wherever it may be. I am connecting to those generations of women before me who knew how to build that home for God. Not vanquish the darkness, but build that beautiful home for God. I am connecting to those strong women. And I am a link in the chain that not only is connecting to them, but I am going to be responsible for the ultimate revelation of God's presence here in this world, fully with the revelation of Mashiach, as women, Nashim Tzidkanios, do. You see, in the Garden of Eden, they were unclothed, and no one was ashamed. Because in the Garden of Eden, where God's revelation was not hidden, there was no need for this protection. But here in this world where there is concealment, where there is so much going on, and where we are that balance, that dot, that inner dot, that is holding everything together, we need to be the sa'ar, the boundaries for our homes, for our families. We need to be the ones to hold it all together. The last creation was Eve, was Chava. She's the pinnacle, the highest revelation. She's called Aim Kol Chai, the mother of all life. She's called this even after the sin. This is when she's called it, even after the sin of the Eitz Hadas. Because women have that ability of taking everything around us and creating from it life and blessing. I want to share with you a story that touched me. This is a story about a Belzer Chassid. His name was Feivel Shapiro. When Feivel was only a boy of 12 years old, his mother passed away. It was soon, a few months before his bar mitzvah. She left a house full of young orphans. He was the youngest. 25 years later, Feivel Shapiro finds himself on a business trip in Crown Heights. And he decides he's going to pray, he's going to daven in 770, Chabad headquarters there. After Ma'ariv, the evening service, he sees it's interesting, there's some kind of commotion going on, and he asks, what's going on tonight? What's all the fuss? And they say, well, tonight is a night. In those days, the Rebbe used to have yechidas, which means he would privately have appointments with people throughout the night. And if you had an appointment, you could actually come in and speak to the Rebbe and get his personal blessing. They tell him tonight is the yechidas, the Rebbe is holding yechidas. Hearing this, Feivel says, let me go there. He was a very lively and very self-confident person, and he always was used to getting what he wanted. So he decides, let me go to see what's going on in the yechidas, in the room where people were waiting for their own yechidas. He sees a long line of people there, and he decides, I'm going to get in. I don't have an appointment, but I'm going to get in. He goes to the next person who's supposed to go next, and he says, I have to leave very soon. I need to go before you. And the person says, okay, go ahead. When the last person comes out of the Rebbe's room, Feivel goes in. The Rebbe's secretary, Rebbe Groner, is like absolutely appalled. He's ready to schlep him out. He's ready to he doesn't have an appointment and he's going in. But the Rebbe says, it's okay. So Feivel sits down. And usually when you go into the Rebbe, you usually had some kind of zettel, which means a paper that you would write something that your questions, your blessings, what your requests were. But of course, Feivel had nothing because he just went in front of the line and went in there. So Feivel is sitting there and looking at the Rebbe, and the Rebbe is sitting and looking at him and not saying anything. After a minute or so, the Rebbe stands up and he goes to his set of drawers and he takes out a letter. He takes out a letter that was written 25 years earlier by Feivel's mother. And in it she writes, and you can imagine as a mother, we can just feel the pain. She writes, I know what's going to happen to me. She was obviously in the very last stages. And I'm not asking the Rebbe for my own self, for anything that I need. But I am asking the Rebbe for my children. Please bless them, that they'll be okay. Please ask God to take care of them, and please take care of my children. Feivel never heard of this letter, never knew of this letter, never knew anything that happened. And he says to the Rebbe, can I please keep a copy of it? Can I have it? And the Rebbe says, I'm sorry, but this is the letter that I read before I go in on Kol Nidre on Yom Kippur night. This is what I read. The Rebbe was saying on this holiest day of the year, on Yom Kippur, when he has all the spiritual, physical needs of Klal Yisrael, of the Jewish people on his shoulders, and he's going to elicit God's blessings, God's mercy. Before doing so, he gets the inspiration from this selfless Jewish mother, who is asking only for the sake of her children. Ladies, it's before Rosh Hashanah. So much is going on in our world. If there's one message that I want you to take home from tonight, is Kedoshim Tihiyu. You are holy. You are a holy being. You are that dot that's holding so much on your shoulders. And sometimes it's really difficult when we're holding so much, when we're carrying so much, when so many people's needs are about us, are relying on us. But we are holy. We are holy, and we are a line of Jewish women who are going to bring the Geula, going to bring the redemption to this world. We are that dot, and we're doing it with all the boundaries that we have, with all the sa'ar that we take. Through the limitations that we experience, we're going to create the greatest revelation, that home for God, that in the 2400 years, in the 24th century of the creation of this world, God said, I'm relying on you, ladies, to make me that home, to create that home. I don't know at what stage you are with covering your hair, whether you do, whether you don't, whether you do it most of the time, whether you do it a little bit of the time, whether you do it fully. But as women, we can decide to take on a little bit extra in this mitzvah. As women, we can decide when we are doing this mitzvah to remember something integral, and that is, I am holy. My being is a reflection of God in this world. Every aspect of me is a reflection of the divine, even more so than the man. And I am that reflection that can diminish or expand God's presence in this world, because every action of mine matters, because I am holy. I want to bless each and every one of you that this year should only bring you the greatest blessings in your life and the greatest blessings in our own lives, and that we can bring the greatest blessings to the world. The greatest blessing is the revelation of godliness in this world, where there is no more sha'ar, there is no more limitations, but everything is revealing God's infinite presence in this world. May this talk and may the undertakings that each of you are going to take on tonight be a tremendous zechus, a merit for all Klal Yisrael, for anyone specifically who needs any specific bracha, blessing, whether it be in parnasa, in livelihood, in children, in shidduchim, or in any area of our lives. Because ladies, you are holy.